Remington Park in Oklahoma City. Today we're at Remington Park in Oklahoma City. Today we're at Remington Park in Oklahoma City talking to multiple vets. I am going to be by far the least educated person in the room. However, we're going to talk to different people about colic. We're going to talk about ulcers. We're going to talk about senior horses keeping weight on. It's going to be a fun-filled day. Hello everyone, welcome to episode 17 of Steve's Horse Show. I am your host, Steve Cook, and today I'm the most undereducated person in the room. We have two doctors amongst us, Dr. Williamson and Dr. Davidson. We are talking about nutrition today. Purina is the talk of the day. We're going to talk about a new product that has been developed with gastric upset, gastric issues, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Introduce us to the products that you guys have now.
Go ahead, Kat. Well, we've got 3 new products that are part of our overall gastric health program that we've developed at Purina. The program is really all about trying to help support horses that have issues with gastric disease. Primarily, those horses affected are going to be our athletic horses. And so we've developed an entire program around recognizing which horses are at risk, helping them to understand how you treat those horses, and then how do you manage those horses going forward. And the 3 products, Outlast Gastric Support Supplement, Ultium Gastricare, and Race Ready GT, are all 3 products that help with the management of horses that have gastric issues or are at risk of having gastric issues.
How many horses, do they know how many horses have, gastric issues, like a percentage or a number or something like that?
Yeah, you have to kind of look at, depending on what you do with your horse. Horses doing certain events tend to be at higher risk. So you see a really high prevalence in race horses. Upwards of 90%, research tells us upwards of 90% of race horses may have it. But then you also see as much as 60 to 70% of elite performance horses. And I think what you see is that depending on the horse and what they do, it's really about their level of stress and their environment. There's a lot of factors that go into whether a horse develops gastric discomfort. And we tend to talk about gastric discomfort because they may not all have an actual gastric lesion. That's for your veterinarian to help you to work through. And Outlast, the supplement, was designed simply because we learned through all the research that's been done over the last several years on gastric ulcer syndrome in horses that really the underlying thing is whatever causes horses to accumulate acid in the stomach and to have that acid, their exposure for a long period of time, increases the risk that they'll develop gastric discomfort or gastric ulcers. And so Outlast is really a simple but very effective gastric buffer that helps keep the pH in a normal range for a horse so that their stomach stays more comfortable. With these horses, if they develop gastric ulcers, if you just treat them and you don't change anything about how you manage the horse, they're going to come back.
You just go back to that.
Yeah.
So do you think that, is stress, or what do you think is the number one, not indication, but the number one cause of ulcers?
Yeah, research studies have shown a very, very strong correlation between exercise and the development of gastric disease in horses. And so if you look at the overall prevalence rates of horses with gastric ulcers, the highest you'll find is in thoroughbred race horses at about 93%.
That's insane.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? All the way down to the lowest athletic horse that's been studied are elite Western performance horses, and they're running at about 47%. So
wow.
Even
I don't know if you caught this, but she said the least athletic is the Western horse. Just kidding.
Yeah. I think
highly stressed.
I think I may have misspoke there because they're not less athletic. I've actually worked with quite a few of them, but I guess what I'm saying is they have the lowest prevalence.
The lowest is 47, which is insane. One out of 2.
You're looking at least half the horses in the barn in any circumstances, and I think based on my experience with some of those elite Western horses, is I think the number's higher than that.
Really?
It depends on where you cut that elite level.
That's true. Yeah.
My son's a professional rodeo cowboy, and I think amongst those horses that are hauled so much and competed on so often, that's going to be a different level than, you know, your horses who maybe go to a horse show once a month or something like that. So putting them in a trailer, getting on them and riding them, all these things increase the risk of developing gastric ulcers. And if you think about the horse's physiology, a horse evolved as a grazing animal. Most horse owners are pretty aware of that horses are evolved as a grazing animal. And so their stomach continuously secretes acid through the day because they should be eating small little meals through the day. When we confine them and we feed them 2 meals a day, or we put them in a trailer or anything like that, it seems to increase that acid level in the stomach, and then that in turn helps cause a more higher risk of.
Do you think if everyone just fed, throughout the day, that would cut down on a good majority of that? Or do you think that the stress is more involved?
It helps. I think the research is telling us that even a fully fed stomach, once you put a saddle on that horse and you start riding that horse, there's research that shows that the minute you break out of a walk and you go into a trot, into a lope, or a canter, depending on the discipline you ride in, but the acidity of the stomach goes up on a fully fed stomach. So yes, continually feeding, that's one piece of it, but it's like so many things we do with our horses. There's not a magic bullet to prevent everything in every horse. It's a total management program. And there are cases where you have incidents of horses out on pasture that aren't under stress, that just developed a gastric ulcer, and you go, what in the world happened there?
What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
It's like people that don't have a job or something, and they're stressed
And some
out,
people handle it different, you know. And so you take those horses that we haul and we compete on. There are some horses we all know that are good haulers, and that they eat and they drink and they rest, and hauling is just not a big deal. And then there's other horses who really stress out on doing the same thing.
The exact same situation.
So those horses may be the ones that tend to be at higher risk. So it's kind of fun, again, when you go through the brochure, you can look at the risk factors and you can kind of count, like, that applies to my horse, and that's my horse. And when you begin to get multiple risk factors, then
Were you surprised, or did you help with the brochure? Were you surprised at how many, might be indications that you didn't think about?
Yeah, and I personally have a horse that I never would have had him scoped for an ulcer, because he's not that far along as what you would really think. He hasn't gone off feed, he hasn't gotten that grouchy, some of the things we think about of horses with ulcers. So I never have even thought to have him scoped, but I put him on Outlast because I could, and we were doing the field studies, and it changed his demeanor. This horse is just not as anxious when I ride him. When he's on the supplement, he doesn't get as nervous and grouchy a little bit. So I think there's horses out there we would never suspect.
Right.
And again, that's why we kind of use the term gastric discomfort, because I don't know if I was to scope him today if he would actually have a lesion. He just may have react. If anybody's ever had heartburn, and just the discomfort with that, some horses are very stoic and they just muscle through any kind of pain, and some horses are a little bit
different personalities.
Yes.
Yeah.